I was the child no one believed in, ignored, overlooked, forgotten, until I built a life they couldn't touch. I learned early how to become invisible without leaving the room. In our house, love wasn't missing. It was just unevenly distributed. It flowed loudly toward my brother, filling spaces with reassurance and praise, while I learned to live in the quiet edges. No one told me I was less important. No one had to. It was in who was called first, who was waited for, whose mistakes were softened with smiles. I learned to notice before I learned to speak. The creak of the hallway floor meant footsteps. If they slowed near my door, I held my breath. If they passed, I exhaled and told myself I hadn't needed anything anyway. My brother's room was closer to the living room, so the footsteps lingered there. Laughter traveled easily through walls. Concern did too. My room learned silence. I was 6 the first time I noticed it clearly. Not the absence of love. Children don't have language for that yet. But the imbalance. My brother spilled juice on the couch. My mother laughed and said, "Careful next time, sweetheart." I knocked over my cup later that evening. She sighed, stood up slowly, and handed me a towel without looking at my face. "Why can't you be more careful?" I cleaned it quietly. I remember thinking the mess wasn't the problem. I was. That was how it worked. Small moments. No shouting. No cruelty you could point to and name. Just a pattern of attention that curved around me like water around a stone. At school events, my parents sat forward when my brother performed. When it was my turn, they checked their phones. At dinner, his stories were interrupted with questions, mine with silence. If I stopped talking mid-sentence, no one noticed. I learned to finish my thoughts inside my head, where they wouldn't be cut off. By 10, I was an expert observer. I knew when to ask for things, rarely, and how to ask, softly, apologetically, as if borrowing space that wasn't mine. My brother asked loudly. He expected yes, and usually got it. I don't remember deciding to become disciplined. It happened the way moss grows on stone, slowly, without permission. I did my homework alone at the kitchen table while my parents helped my brother in the living room. I learned to reread instructions. I learned to fail quietly, to fix my mistakes before anyone saw them. Praise didn't come, so I stopped expecting it. Relief became my reward. No complaints, no attention, no disappointment aimed at me. At night, I lay awake listening to the house breathe. I imagined what it would be like to be chosen without asking, to be the first name called, to be missed. In high school, the difference sharpened. My brother's talents were celebrated loudly. Tutors were hired. Coaches were consulted. When he struggled, the house reorganized itself around his needs. When I struggled, I reorganized myself. I didn't tell them about the panic that sat in my chest during exams, or the way my hands shook when grades were posted. I figured it out. I learned routines. I learned control. I learned that if I became reliable enough, maybe I would matter. I watched my parents beam at my brother's acceptance letter, their voices thick with pride. When my letter came months later, my mother hugged me briefly and said, "That's nice. Make sure it's practical." I nodded. Practical was safe. Practical didn't ask for celebration. College was the loneliest freedom I'd ever known. No one knew me, which meant no one ignored me either. I worked 2 jobs. I missed parties. I learned the city by walking it late at night after closing shifts, letting the air cool my thoughts. I failed a class once and cried alone in a stairwell, then retook it without telling anyone. I learned that resilience isn't loud. It's repetitive. It's showing up when no one is watching. My parents called often for my brother. They asked how he was adjusting, if he needed money, if he was eating well. When they asked about me, it was at the end of conversations, like an afterthought. "And you're fine, right?" I was always fine. Fine became a shield I learned to carry without realizing how heavy it was. After graduation, my brother stumbled. Without constant praise, he didn't know how to stand. Rejection felt like an insult to him, not a lesson. My parents rushed in, confused and frantic, trying to rebuild the scaffolding that had always held him up. I watched from a distance, already working, already tired in a way no one asked about. My first job wasn't impressive. I was a junior analyst at a mid-sized consulting firm that had grown too fast and learned too slowly. Long hours, modest pay, quiet pressure to perform without complaint. I sat in the corner of the office, headphones on, absorbing everything. I learned systems, spreadsheets, risk models. I learned how decisions were made, and how easily they could be wrong. Early adulthood wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, repetitive, and heavy. I woke before sunrise to beat traffic and stayed late because leaving on time felt like failure. I ate lunches at my desk, answered emails on weekends, and learned to measure exhaustion in weeks instead of hours. I told myself this was what building a future looked like, endurance disguised as ambition. At the firm, I was useful but invisible. I fixed errors no one noticed unless they weren't fixed. I prepared reports executives presented as their own. When mistakes happened, my name surfaced. When things went right, it disappeared. Promotions passed me by. Raises came late, if at all. Still I stayed. Stability mattered more than pride. Growing up overlooked had trained me well for that. At night, doubt crept in. I wondered if this was all I would ever be: reliable, replaceable, quietly competent. I didn't call my parents to talk about it. I already knew how those conversations ended. Just work harder, they'd say, as if effort alone guaranteed security. For years, the firm chased expansion instead of stability. Leadership poured money into flashy acquisitions and new offices they couldn't sustain. They built entire departments around one major client, restructuring everything to serve that single account. When the market shifted and the client pulled out, the damage was immediate. Projects froze. Budgets evaporated. Meetings grew shorter. Smiles turned tight. I noticed before anyone admitted it. Travel approvals were denied. Training budgets vanished. Managers stopped making eye contact. Desks emptied quietly, one by one. The illusion of permanence cracked, and for the first time, I understood how fragile everything I'd been clinging to really was. Then the firm downsized. No warning. No speeches. Just a calendar invite titled Organizational Update. They explained it with slides and careful language. Market volatility, strategic realignment, necessary reductions. Senior leadership needed protection. Client-facing roles were prioritized. Back-end teams were labeled non-essential. It didn't matter that we carried the operational weight. It mattered that we weren't visible. When my name was called, it was said gently, almost apologetically. They thanked me for my contributions. They said it wasn't personal. They slid a thin envelope across the table and avoided my eyes. I nodded. I shook hands. I said I understood. I walked out carrying a cardboard box that felt lighter than it should have, because most of what I owned had always lived in my head. On the bus ride home, the city passed by in fragments. Windows, faces, movement, while something hollow opened in my chest. Not panic, a realization. Loyalty didn't guarantee safety. Hard work didn't promise protection, and no one was coming to rescue me. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the box unopened on the floor. For the first time, I let myself feel it. The fear, the anger, the grief of being discarded without ceremony. I didn't call my parents. Survival had always been my private responsibility. But fear didn't break me. It focused me. I took inventory, not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd learned. I understood systems. I understood risk. I understood how value was created and how it was ignored. I took a risk and began consulting on my own, small contracts at first, then larger ones. I worked from a cramped apartment, laptop balanced on a kitchen table, doubt sitting quietly beside me every night. Some months I barely broke even. Other months, hope arrived softly, and I kept it to myself. I reinvested everything. I built processes, then a small team. I chose people who worked like I did, quiet, capable, resilient. Opportunities multiplied not because I chased attention, but because I delivered consistency. Projects grew, then multiplied. I expanded into technology and business consulting, helping companies optimize operations, adopt new digital solutions, and scale efficiently. Gradually, I moved from a one-person operation to a full-fledged tech and consulting firm. Offices opened in multiple cities. Teams swelled into hundreds. I learned to trust others, and in doing so, I discovered something I had never known in my childhood. Family could be chosen. Friends became colleagues. Colleagues became lifelong companions. Together, we built something stronger than any one person could achieve alone. Years of silent effort accumulated into real impact. My company grew steadily, then exponentially, from hundreds of employees to thousands. From small consulting contracts to multinational projects across finance, healthcare, logistics, and software. Eventually, what had begun on a kitchen table became a multi-billion-dollar company. I hired and nurtured people I could rely on. People who believed in the work, the mission, and in each other. We celebrated milestones together, shared hardships, and supported one another in ways my own family never had. I bought my first property, then another, then several more, not for show, but as proof. Proof that I had created something lasting with hands no one had held and vision no one had taught me. Years passed. My brother struggled once the praise stopped. Without applause, he felt lost. My parents tried to rescue him, the same way they always had, but their constant guidance had never taught him resilience. Slowly, I watched confidence fade, opportunities slip by, and mistakes compound. Their business ventures stalled. Decisions they once made with certainty now wavered. What had once been stability became fragility, and suddenly, they were the ones reaching out, uncertain and reliant. The day my parents came to my door, I recognized their footsteps before I saw them. They seemed smaller somehow, hesitant, cautious. They spoke carefully about pride, about family, about my accomplishments. And beneath it all, their words carried a quiet admission. They needed help. I listened, truly listened. And then I answered with a calm they had never given me, but also never managed to take away. I forgave them, not to rewrite the past, but to free myself from it. I wished them peace. I wished them clarity. But I did not hand them access to a life built from quiet effort and long nights they never noticed. Some doors are closed not out of anger, but out of self-respect. I shut the door gently. The house was quiet. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't empty or lonely. It was dense with memory and effort, shaped by years of being overlooked and choosing endurance over resentment, steady with self-respect, and finally, unmistakably, my own. Thank you to everyone who stayed to listen. If this story found you, know this: being overlooked can break you, or it can build you. And if you are still standing, still breathing, still becoming, you are already stronger than you were ever told. Thank you for being here. If this story found you, know this: being overlooked can break you, or it can build you. And if you're still standing, still breathing, still becoming, you are already stronger than you were ever told. If these words resonated with you, please consider liking this video. It helps this story reach others who may need to hear it. Subscribe for more stories that give voice to experiences often left unspoken, and share this with someone who might find strength in it. Your thoughts matter. Leave a comment with what this story meant to you, or suggest a story you would like to hear next. Thank you for being here.